And I think we will find in a couple of years' time, and this happened in the early 2000s as well, where we find particularly scarce and critical skills actually moving up so quickly in the market that they've been promoted to their highest level of incompetence. They are overpaid, and then we will sit with highly disengaged employees in the organization. And that worries me looking down the line.
Hello everyone and welcome to HR Hot Topics, the show in which we talk about some of the articles that we've read in the past month and give our perspective on it, well, from an HR perspective essentially. Our main story is about the Great Resignation. The Great Resignation is creating massive pay disparities, especially in tech firms like Google and Amazon, between new hires and current employees, sparking tensions on teams and a ripple effect of departures. The war on talent is back. In the US alone, there's 11.3 open jobs and only 6 million people who can fill these jobs. And what we're seeing is that there are massive signing bonuses and new workers command premium salaries. So essentially, if you don't switch jobs now, you're a thief of your own wallet. And Dieter, my question to you is this sustainable? Can companies just solve the talent shortage by throwing more and more money at it? Or are there other solutions that HR should bring?
Eric, I definitely think we need to think further than just throwing money at the problem. Something that worries me when we talk about this particular topic is that we are starting to cannibalize our own talent pools. And the trend that we are also seeing, not just on the acquisition side, but a lot more on the engagement and retention side, is that the employees that remain behind are overworked on the one end, but also with pay transparency, they are starting to realize, as you've correctly mentioned, that I'm paying a lot less than somebody that's just been brought in, that doesn't have the organizational knowledge that I have, and that's doing exactly the same job. And that leads them to then join this vicious cycle of also trying to go outside just for a higher salary. And I don't think that is sustainable. I think we need to think beyond that into a lot more robust talent strategies, but also internally to think about how do we look after our own? How do we look after our people that we currently have in the organization and not just fill those current gaps? What do you recommend talent strategies need to look like in order to combat this particular trend?
I think there's a couple of things that organizations need to do. And the first one being to raise salaries of existing employees. Because it may be very attractive, to keep salaries low and just wait till someone leaves and only then raise the salary. But you're then dealing with, a big loss of knowledge of the organization. You're dealing with a ramp-up period that could take 6 to 9 months before employees are up to optimum productivity. And that employee is much more expensive. So you have a lesser performing employee who's not up to speed, who is much more expensive, and you would much rather keep that old employee just at a higher salary. So I think the first element is raising salaries and taking care of the people who are in the organization and making sure you retain them. I think the second one is really being clear and having a compelling employee value proposition. So knowing why people want to work for you if you want to hire them, but also knowing why people would want to stay with you if you want to retain them. And I think there's still a lot of work that we can do in the EVP space. And I think third, it's about thinking outside of the box. When we talk about jobs, are there certain tasks in these jobs that, may or have a potential to be automated? And can we then bring in these new techniques and technologies in order to reduce some of the workload of our current employees? I think that is a starting point. But I'm also wondering, Dieter, is there something within HR and within the alignment within HR that we can do in order to address this in a better way?
I definitely think so, Eric. I think we are starting to also see a symptom here of HR operating in silos, where I think on the one side, talent acquisition is pushing salaries up to say, but this is the only way that we will be able to go into this very strongly dominated employee-driven talent market. Whilst on the other side, we're not necessarily thinking about what is that doing to the HR functions that look after things like employee engagement, employee retention, and how we move people through the organization from a talent point of view. So I think structurally, from a design perspective, there's definitely opportunity for us in HR to think differently about that and to say, but how do we think integrated about the end-to-end employee experience, and how do we incorporate that into the decisions we make with regards to things like pay, like attraction, like keeping people with regards to things like retention bonuses or other types of incentives from a reward point of view as well. I think if we don't do this, we will end up in a situation where tenure from an employee perspective just really goes down. And I think we will find in a couple of years' time, and this happened in the early 2000s as well, where we find particularly scarce and critical skills actually moving up so quickly in the market that they've been promoted to their highest level of incompetence. They are overpaid, and then we will sit with highly, highly disengaged employees in the organization. And that worries me looking down the line.
I think that's a very, very valid point. And I think what's also interesting in this perspective is that we're now talking with a very, very employee-driven market. So when it comes to the way we do talent acquisition, also operationally and tactically, there are some things we need to implement in order to do it good. And we're already noticing it here at the Academy to Innovate HR. You're looking for candidates, and candidates, get multiple job offers, potentially a month even if they are in demand. So they really need to be at their place in the organization in order to stay there. At the same time, the way you communicate to candidate is not like 10 years ago when, you put out a job opening and you would get, 50 to 100 candidates. Could still be possible if you have a very strong employer brand. So I think that is one of the elements that as organization you should invest in, because that will really set you apart in this war for talent. But it's also in how do you approach candidates, and can candidates make potentially the time for you to interview with you, and what does then that interview and selection process look like, especially in a candidate driven market? Because if that takes too long, is too burdensome, that candidate will be working somewhere else in no time, and might also leave a bad review for your process, making it even harder to attract candidates. So I think on the talent acquisition side, there's a lot of things operationally that we can improve just to be better at this.
I also think there's an opportunity here, and we are definitely seeing in the market a trend towards pay transparency. And I think a couple of years ago, talking about pay and what I'm paid versus what you are paid has been a taboo topic in most organizations, and that is really starting to change. And then there's been a few interesting organizations that have gone full on transparency. Now that is a very big topic to dissect. What I think it does tell us though is that pay is not the only way to keep people on the one end, but on the other side, it's not something that's going to be hidden that you can count on employees not talking about. So if you you need to do the billboard test, right? If this information is visible to everybody else, how are you going to respond to that as an organization? And I think it brings us back to the point that you mentioned around real work we need to do in the employee value proposition space, in the employee experience space. And I actually think the future from an employer branding point of view is about employee-driven stories and employee-generated content. People want to join organizations where they can have an authentic experience that fits into what they want from work. And we can only realize that, again, to get back to my earlier point, if we start working collaboratively and collectively across all the different functions in HR. So that when we go out from a talent acquisition point of view, what we promise is what we can deliver on within the organization, and it is something that people will actually want to have and want to build towards. And I think we have to also move away from short-termism, if I can call it that. It's not just about the now, it's about what are we helping employees contribute towards within the organization, and what are they building collectively together. Do you think this trend will last? Or do you think that there will be certain shifts we need to make?
I think it will depend on the economy, but for now, what we're seeing, is just an incredible shortage in the labor market, and for now, that is what we'll have to deal with. And when it comes to hiring talent and retaining talent, I think this is really where HR has to step up. And I think also come up with just new initiatives and maybe go beyond, the way we are thinking currently. I was just looking at some statistics, researching this story, and it was about parents voluntarily leaving a job because of childcare issues. Percentages between 7% in Texas and 11% in Arkansas of people departing a job, because of childcare issues. And, then I'm thinking, is there really nothing that the organization can do in order to accommodate this a little bit more, and would it be a very bad thing if someone would work half a day less, if they can then properly take care of their children, instead of someone just fully leaving and you have another spot to fill and you already have so many spots to fill. So I think it's also about going kind of beyond what we're doing for employees and really going that extra mile as an HR department and investing in those areas where we can really make a tangible difference. And I think there are many more examples like that where we can go the extra mile essentially as HR.
I think there's also a great shift towards, and in the employee experience domain, we've been talking a lot about memorable moments. I think that's also being complemented at the moment from an organizational point of view around moments of value. So where's that overlap between something that's valuable for the organization, but also it makes sense and it's a memorable moment that really attracts attracts me to the organization and keeps me there as an employee. And I think there's a great opportunity for HR here to think beyond just the reward, but to really think, what is that holistic experience? And I think we're starting to see some really, really innovative things in the employee value proposition space. You mentioned childcare. I think we're starting to see, from a flexible working point of view, I think we're also starting to see people that's actually splitting up work days so that people are able to also look at some of their family responsibilities. I think we need to think broader than that around holistic experience, whereas on the other end, money is important. So make sure that you've got that hygiene factor covered as well, but look at it from a longer term and a more sustainable point of view.
And in line with that, when we talk about long term and sustainable, I think there's also a role, especially when it comes to critical skills that will have a big shortage of, I think, IT related skills, data analysis, artificial intelligence, automation related skills. I think there's really a role for organizations, and we've talked about this in previous shows as well, on bringing in young workers and upskilling them with the skills that you need for the future. I think that is also a brilliant starting point to invest in order to guarantee that you have an availability of those skills longer term in the future. And I think in line with that, there's also quite some interest, and that's my personal interest at least, in what are some of the jobs that we're hiring for, and how can we potentially break down those jobs into different sets of tasks, and which are the tasks that you really need a certain qualification for to do, and which are the tasks that someone else, an administrator, can do, or that can be done through technology or automation. I think we need to be much more strategic in selecting what is a worker shortage. If we talk about I was watching an interview of John Boudreau, who recently wrote a book on work without jobs, who said there's a big shortage of nurses, but what are nurses doing? They spend a long or big part of their day scheduling appointments. Scheduling is something that someone else can do. So all of a sudden we need less nurses to do the same work. And either, taking someone's temperature, isn't that someone that's, something that a non-nurse can also do? That is something that a non-nurse can also do. So then you reduce kind of that job to the really specifics of what does it mean to be a nurse. And many of these other tasks you can start to, give to other people and to other roles. And that's a very different way of looking at a skills problem, really breaking it down to tasks. And I think that is also an innovative approach that I would really recommend organizations to take more.
I want to build on that because I think there's also the opportunity for job crafting. And I think it's something that we've been talking about a lot. I think not a lot of organizations have necessarily embraced that from a very practical point of view, but to think beyond just what is the job now in terms of really shaping it towards what the job could be. And how do we take some of these different elements, especially where it is critical talent for the organization, and thinking about how can we almost put together experiences within a particular job that's really going to drive and motivate and engage this particular individual. I think challenging work is still proven to be one of the best retention and engagement mechanisms for most talent, especially talent that is driven by the content of what they are busy with. And I think we have to think beyond the traditional job analysis and job description and really start thinking about how do we shape these things a lot more fluidly, and then how do we make sure that the other factors and enablers around that, in terms of the things we've already mentioned, EVP, reward, etc., is in place to really promote this and make sure that we balance in a very, very strong employee-driven market what we offer as an organization and the authentic experiences that we are able to create.
And I think in line with that, how do we encourage people to proactively craft their jobs? Because in job crafting, you have this proactive approach where you do it as an employee because, it gives you energy, you add certain tasks. And this reactive kind, the organization is changing, so my job is changing as well. So I need to craft my job into a different way. How can we really encourage people to proactively craft their job? Because I think there's so many good benefits. On the one hand, because people create more inspiring jobs, more energizing jobs. At the same time, it enables people to explore the skills that, may be untapped, that are advantageous to the organization. And I think we need much, much more of that as well in the future.
I agree. And I think it can only happen if we create cultures where people feel that this is encouraged, where people feel that this is the way to do things, and where people feel empowered to say, but when I think about my own career, I also have a responsibility to be able to shape that. And ultimately, I think that is really what it boils down to, is are we creating cultures where people can flourish, where people can thrive, and where people can see a long-term future for themselves as part of building a story and not just doing a job.
Dieter, thank you very much. And with that, we've given a lot of practical, tangible tips on how we as HR professionals and as an HR department can deal with the great resignation that's happening all around us. Now, I would love to hear what you're doing in order to solve this problem and in order to retain people. So please do let us know in the comments down below what are some of the policies that you found are very successful in retaining people and in dealing with this talent shortage that we're in at the moment. And with that being said, I would love to thank you all for your attention and wish you all a brilliant day. Bye bye.